Joining us for this edition of Debate, social justice activist YahNé Ndgo joins us from Cali, Colombia. And activist and commentator Life Malcolm joins us from Tampa, Florida. I'd like to welcome you both. Let me first start with you, if I may, Life Malcolm. We're looking here now at the 6th day of protests, most likely to go on to 7. And as one publication called it, another day and night of fire and fury. Do you think this is still about the murder of George Floyd at the hands of a white police officer?
Well, thanks again for having me on Press TV. That's a trick question. It suggests that I once thought it was about George Floyd. This has never been about George Floyd and this one murder. This has always been about years and years of police aggression, police brutality, and police murders of African people in this country, amongst other things, of course, you know. But this police brutality that is now in the face of everybody in America, because we have camera footage for it, you know, is the thing that is energizing people to amplify their voices against such brutality that's been going on for a long time. It's not just because it happened to George Floyd. It's the most recent incident, you know, and it was the white mainstream media's arrogant display of George Floyd's murder over and over again, 24/7 on television, that raised the ire and the intensity of the people. And so that's what we have right now.
Okay, I'm going to have you with the same question here, if I may, Yahya Ndgo. Do you think this has to deal more with what we're looking at as the initial spark, which was the murder of George Floyd?
You know, they have that statement, the straw that broke the camel's back. And in order for there to be a straw to break the camel's back, there have to be a lot of other straws first. And that's really what this situation is. I mean, I think the murder of George Floyd was very significant. It was significant because the image that people saw. I am, like many activists, am not one who actually watched the video. And even without watching the video, just the description along with just the picture, I can't get it out of my mind. I can't get it out of my eyes. And so you have a very visceral, very emotional reaction to this moment, but it is also triggers so many others. I mean, last year in 2019, there were 1,099 people who were killed by police. You know, and I've lost track of the number of people who have been murdered by police just in the last month. You know, you had 3 people who were murdered by police, Drayshawn Reed, Mikhail Rose, and Ashlyn Libby, who was pregnant, and her daughter also was murdered in Indianapolis within 8 hours of each other. So, you know, you have the extreme violence of police, the perpetual harassment of police that happens consistently in the daily lives of Black people, and in addition to so many other forms of structural racism that exist in the United States. And people are tired of it. And Black people are tired of it, and the community, the country is tired of this kind of inequity.
Okay, let's expand a little bit, and of course you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, Life Malcolm, but just to get an idea, because what our guest there said about how African Americans experience discrimination on a daily basis, you can look that up in terms of a simple Google search, and you see many instances that have been cited. But I'm curious as to what you experience. Is this part of daily life for African Americans to be discriminated against or have some kind of bias be leveled against them because of their color?
That's the consequence that got African people to this country in the first place, being profiled and discriminated against. I mean, that's how we got here in 1619. You know, they picked us out. So that's a common part of every African person's life in the United States. So it's nothing new. Sometimes America is more cleverer at hiding and concealing the discriminatory intentions, and so sometimes we lose track of that kind of dynamic in the United States. Like when Barack Hussein Obama, for example, was the president, you had in Minneapolis another murder broadcast on television in Philando Castile. Cops shot him in his car, and everybody saw it. But Barack Hussein Obama was able to, you know, smooth things over. Now you have this guy, Donald John Trump, in the White House, who makes it very clear that there's a dividing line in the United States of America between those of us who are colonized and those who colonize us. And so you see a different response because now this contradiction is made clearer. So yeah, this is this discrimination thing has always been a part of African life. Sometimes you see it more sharply than others, and now it's a 2020 vision.
Why do you think Donald Trump is dealing with this in the form and manner that he is? And I say that with to add what the latest is of what Trump has said, which you may now know, and that is he told governors they need to, quote, dominate the activists who are protesting the killing of George Floyd.
Yeah, I'm going to help you with my name. It's YahNé Ndgo.
Ndgo, thank you. Sorry about
no
that.
Problem. No problem at all. Yeah, so I mean, the state has had a consistency over the over its inception of responding with extreme violence against any kind of act for liberation, any fight for equality. I mean, it's very well known. People have seen the footage from from the 60s of the water hoses and dogs being sick on people. I mean, I'm from the city of Philadelphia. The city of Philadelphia dropped a bomb on civilians, murdering 11 people, including 5 children, who were protesting the wrong incarceration of members of their family and of their community. You have Mumia Abu-Jamal, who is in prison, has been imprisoned for over 35 years for for police brutality, for the claim that he's murdered police. But on the flip side, police don't get time for murdering people in our community. So it's really just a part of the culture of the nation. But as it relates to Trump, Trump, so much about what's going on right now is being instigated and being exacerbated by the way that Donald Trump is handling the situation. And you can look at the difference in how, when you have white people who show up armed, if they're fighting against the shutdown, or they're fighting because they want to take over or take ownership of some land, and they come there with all of their guns, there's nothing that's done to them, or there's massive amounts of time, energy invested in and negotiating with them, and none of those things are done when it comes to dealing with Black people, because it is the perception of the nation that has been established since the beginning of its inception through the enslavement of so many millions of people, and the moving and stealing of so many people from the African continent in order to build the country in the first place, that certain lives don't actually matter, which is why the term Black Lives Matter exists. So they only matter for the use and exploitation of the people. So this is almost like the response to the uppityness of African people to decide that they are going to, or that we are going to stand out and actually speak to what it is that we are demanding for ourselves, and then to stand in those demands. And that is considered completely unacceptable for us in our community within a construct of this nation. But it doesn't matter what that nation perceives, because we know that we have rights. We are not going to back down on the realization of what it is that we want and demand for ourselves.
Well, it's just after decades since Martin Luther King life, Malcolm, we're looking at the fact that most Americans to this day are saying that the U.S. has yet to achieve racial equality. Looking at the stat that I'm looking at from one source, roughly 6 in 10, that's 61% of the American population say that their country needs to continue making changes for African Americans to have equal rights with whites. Why is this such a struggle?
Are you asking me?
This is Life Malcolm, I'm sorry.
So it's a struggle, if I understand the question correctly, because there's this unidentifiable goal to eliminate white people's feelings or something like that from African people. I'm not sure what that thing is about. What I do know is the struggle for African people in the United States has to be for power, political power, military power, economic power. The struggle has to be for power. We cannot achieve some kind, and for far too long, that's been the rhetoric. I mean, we often talk about it on this program here, this race and racism thing, and there's no way that we can ever figure out in a measurable way how to make white people like us, nor should we. You know, that's not what we're here for, to make white people like us. The goal has to be to figure out, to organize in a way to get white people's knees off our necks. We have to have power and control over our own collective lives. And that's the solution. And so, as long as we're fiddling and fumbling around trying to chasing this chimera, like the solution to racism, it'll always be. I forgot how you characterize it, but it'll always be a problem. But when we begin to struggle for power, our goal will come clearer into view.
Okay, we need to elaborate more, if you can, Ndgo, on this power that our guest there talks about. How can that be achieved? How can African Americans achieve more of that or get more of that?
Well, interestingly, a part of that, it comes right into what Malcolm was saying, is by shifting our own mindset. You know, there are people in our community who think that the path forward is through appeals to another community, when the path forward for our community comes from our own actualization of our own power. And so we have to actually pull ourselves more together. You know, there is a lot of organizing that's happening. There's a lot of organizing that happens in local different environments, and a lot of collaborative organizing that happens both locally and nationally. But we as a community have to really begin to function and see ourselves as what we are, which is a nation inside of this nation. We are our own nation state. We don't have any protections in the context of the U.S. nation. We're not going to get any. We were never meant to have it, and we're not going to get it through the U.S. nation. We have to actually establish that for ourselves on our own terms, and so we have to organize ourselves collectively. I'm a part of the Black Alliance for Peace. I'm a coordinating committee member, and I'm the outreach coordinator for Black Alliance for Peace. And our campaign is no compromise, no retreat, stop the war on African people in the U.S. and abroad. And the reason that there's a war on African people is because African people are not perceived as being a part of the U.S. community by the structure that is in place in the U.S. community. So, like I said, I'm from Philadelphia. I also organize with Black Lives Matter Philadelphia. We do things like we have a demand right now to defund the police, which is really important for us as we move towards community control of police, as we move towards beyond that to abolition of police in our communities, because that system also was never made. The police departments, the police system was never made to protect or to serve our communities. It was made in order to control our communities and to control any kind of insurgency in our communities, which is why they are treating us the way that they are right now. As long as we continue to try to gain power within their system, we are going to be struggling. When we recognize that we have our own power and we don't need any of theirs, we have our own power and we can pull ourselves together and actually activate that power, then we will begin to actually earn the respect that people are aiming for anyway, because we will have actually embodied respect for ourselves as much as as is desired and deserved.
Okay, if we go along with that line of thought, Life Malcolm, don't you think that therefore we need more African Americans to be in places, in political positions, in positions of government or what have you, in order for the African American community in the U.S. to feel like they do have the power that our guest there is talking about?
No. Like Malcolm said, of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. And if we look at history, right now we probably have something like 7,000 African elected officials in office in the United States of America, maybe more. We used to have one African that was the president, and at that time we had an African who was the Attorney General, and nothing changed for African people in the United States, at least not for the better. And so, what history also teaches us is that political power comes from the barrel of the gun. That's what Mao said, that's what Huey said. It worked then, I believe it works now. And as a matter of fact, the United States knows it works now. That's why they keep the gun trained on African people in the United States and all the colonized people around the world. And so if we're going to achieve political power, we have to look at history and do what history says is best for us to attain that goal.
Okay, you raised an interesting point there, and Ms. Ndego, I'm going to ask you, I mean, my understanding here, if it's incorrect or not, as to what Malcolm there said, are the cops using their hardware, their guns, to suppress the African American community in order for them not to rise in terms of ranks or what have you within the U.S.?
When you say in terms of ranks, the police are definitely using their guns in our communities, and that's why we're having this protest. The police actually are using military-grade equipment. A lot of the military equipment that was not being used a lot of equipment that was not being used in the military anymore has been transferred into local police districts. We have local police districts that have tanks that they use on our people. They have all kinds of grenades and surveillance that they use on our people. And ironically and interestingly, there's a big connection between the police in the U.S. and the military in the U.S. and that in Israel. The methods that they're using, that kneeling that they used on George Floyd, they've been doing that on protesters all around the country. They've been doing using that same technique on protesters. They don't care about the result. They don't care that they murdered a man using this. They're continuing to do this. And two protesters that are involved, people who are involved in these protests across the country right now, they learned that is a technique that is used in Israel. So the combining of these oppressive communities or these oppressive regimes is also working to our detriment. But as it relates to our movement in this system, in this society, the police are just one force of oppression in our communities. And they use their guns, of course, against us. They use them, but I'm not sure what you mean by using them to preventing people from going up the ranks of society. They just use them to murder us and to end our lives and to intimidate us. And there are a lot of different other kinds of methods that are used in order to prevent us from being able to move up the ranks, including the appropriation of our movements and the appropriation of our voices and the using of agents, because we can have a lot of times people try to what I call blackface white supremacy, where you try to take this white supremacist environment and you try to put a black person's face in it, to the point that Malcolm is making. You put a black president, that black president still dropped bombs and destroyed Libya. It still supported the coup in Honduras. Like the black president still, deported, loads of people who came here from countries that we, that we destabilized. So putting a black person in a position in a white supremacist system is still a white supremacist system, and that's really what the problem is.
Okay, as you were speaking, there were some images that we were showing live coming from New York, in which these protests are continuing. So, Live Malcolm, we're looking then for these protests to continue, as we're saying. Where's this going to go? What are we looking at in terms of not letting this go to waste in a matter of speaking, and to learn from it and see how these voices can be heard and for there to be results?
What we have to do is continue to encourage the sisters and brothers who are in the street doing this work in a courageous and energetic fashion. We have to begin to identify and pull in leaders from those groups who are out there working, begin to organize them, help them with the accumulation of necessary resources, make sure that they're well protected while they're amplifying their voices for the world to hear about this struggle. Also, it is imperative. It is imperative that we link with each other all across the country. It's good that things are happening in New York, and there's action in Minnesota, and there's action in Florida, and what have you. But we have to link up, y'all, and because together we can win this thing, and the brighter days are ahead. So it's encouraging. It's an exciting time to be alive, and I'm looking forward to the weeks to come. The people are showing us there's more than one way to vote. So everybody talks about the ballot. Malcolm said the ballot or the bullet. Now young people are showing us that burning is a vote as well. So ballot, bullet, burning. make your voice be
Yeah, I
heard.
agree with that. I think that it's very encouraging that the people are rising up to say that there is no more. And there's a lot of spinning on what the actions, activities, and the motivations are behind people. And the reality, even if if you look at the looting, as it's called, the people are the people wouldn't they need to take things if they weren't being under resourced, because resources are not are permitted from being able to flourish in our communities.
That's right.
And
That's right.
so that's but the other piece of it is that people are coming together. Organizers are coming together across the country, and in their local environments and across the country, people are coming together to organize in order to leverage this to make things better for our people.
Thank you very much for that. We're going to end it there. That's social justice activist YahNé Ndgo from Cali, Colombia, and activist and commentator Life Malcolm from Tampa, Florida.